We are starting to get many younger students now where they are fresh out of school, or their parents see this as a pathway that's going to allow them to get into industry, start building hours, and go to the airlines.
When ADSB was introduced, it was intended to be for safety. It wasn't to be used for fee collection.
Have you ever wondered why airline pilots look like they're about to command a battleship instead of a Boeing? This is the Future in Flight podcast, coming to you from a hangar somewhere near the flight line, where we've got a community pot of chili and plenty of seats for everyone. I'm your host, Sean Starker. Today, we're paying a visit to flyover country, quite literally. Our first story takes us to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to meet a flight school that's been quietly changing the game for 25 years with a 90% completion rate. Yeah, you heard that right, 90%. We'll meet Yuri Milner and Robbie Sturdivant from Riverside Flight Center, who will share how they're getting students from first flight to airline cockpit in under 2 years, and why their $25 discovery flight is one of the cheapest ways in the country to get a taste of aviation. Then, we're diving into something that's got many pilots fired up: how your safety equipment is being turned into a billing system, and why the decisions being made right now could determine whether flying stays accessible or becomes a privilege only for the wealthy. And finally, in cockpit culture, ever wonder why airline pilots look like they're about to command a battleship? The answer involves flying boats, Pan Am, and a brilliant marketing move from the 1930s. We're cleared for takeoff. Let's get it. Picture this. You walk into a flight school for the first time. On the wall, there are hundreds of photographs. Pilots in airline uniforms, standing in front of 737s, A320s, you name it, belonging to domestic and international carriers you've only dreamed about. The thing is, every single one of those pilots started exactly where you're standing. Nervous, maybe broke, definitely wondering if they could actually pull this off. Today, we're heading to Tulsa, Oklahoma, right in the heart of the country, to visit a flight school that's been quietly changing the game for 25 years. And when I say quietly, I mean it. Riverside Flight Center has been focused on one thing: actually getting students across the finish line. The man behind this operation is Yuri Milner, and here's what makes his story different. Before starting his own school, Yuri worked at 5 or 6 other flight training institutions. He paid attention. He took notes on what worked and what absolutely didn't. As Yuri told me,
I took all the parts I saw from other schools that they did really well, and I looked at all the parts that I didn't like about all the schools that I had worked at. And I made sure when I set up the business that I took both of those into account, the positives and the negatives.
Think about that approach for a second. How many times have you sat in a class and thought, if I were teaching this, I'd do it completely differently? Well, Yuri actually did something about it. In 2001, he opened Riverside Flight Center with a mission statement that sounds almost too good to be true: provide competent pilots to the industry in a cost-effective manner. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Every flight school says they're affordable. Every school claims they put students first. But Riverside stands out on its merits. They've got a 90% completion rate. Let me say that again. 90% of the students who start training at Riverside actually finish. To put that in perspective, their chief flight instructor, Robbie Sturdivant, shared his own experience.
I went to a big box school, and I was one of about 130 students that started, but one of only about 3 that finished. And that attrition rate is exceptional, and that's not uncommon.
3 out of 130. That's about 2%. Meanwhile, Riverside is hitting 90%. So what's the secret sauce? It starts with location. When Yuri was planning where to set up shop, he chose Oklahoma for very specific reasons. Over 300 VFR flying days per year. Some challenging weather that prepares you for real-world conditions. Hundreds of airports within an hour's flight. Lower cost of living and cheaper fuel prices. And this is a big one, hardworking people who show up every day no matter what. But here's what really sets them apart. They train at Riverside Airport, the busiest airport in Oklahoma. It's a Class Delta with an active control tower. As Robbie explained,
We have a lot of challenges sometimes with students as they begin their flight training in the controlled towered environment because it's so active here. But if you can fly at Riverside Airport, you can fly anywhere in the world.
545, roger, turn right heading 230, follow that traffic, contact Tulsa departure.
think about learning to drive in a big city versus learning in a quiet suburb. Sure, the city is harder, but once you can navigate that, everywhere else feels easy. That's the Riverside philosophy. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the hangar: money. Aviation is expensive, like really expensive. Most four-year aviation degree programs will run you well over $150,000, sometimes north of $200,000. And it takes 4 to 6 years to get through. Riverside's vocational program, about a third of that cost. And here's the kicker. Highly motivated students finish in less than a year. Some are instructing within 12 to 14 months and sitting in an airline cockpit within 2 years of starting training. As Robbie put it,
Our typical program is completed in less than a year. So a student that's highly motivated is able to get started with us, go through their CFI training, and join industry in about a year to 14 months.
but the cost barrier is still real. Discovery flights at most schools run $100 to $200. Want to know what Riverside charges for their 25th anniversary? $25. And it's not some watered-down experience where the instructor does everything while you watch.
If you want to do the takeoff, we'll let you do the takeoff. If you want to talk on the radio, we're going to get you on the radio. If you want to do that landing, we'll let that happen as well. I think that's something that is very fun that we look forward to is introducing new pilots to aviation or new potential pilots to aviation.
They're literally losing money on every Discovery flight. But here's Yuri's logic.
If he gets 10 people actively involved and doing it, then it gives a little bit back, and hopefully they'll spend it at flight training providers like us. And so it just completes the circle. And so you have to give a lot back to the industry that's given you so much as well.
That philosophy, giving back to an industry that's given you so much, it runs through everything at Riverside. They brought their maintenance in-house to ensure safety standards. They use simulation strategically, starting students in basic aircraft without glass cockpits or autopilots, so they learn their stick and rudder skills first. They have 8 simulators, including 5 FAA-approved advanced aviation training devices. And they earn something called examining authority, a rare privilege that only Part 141 schools with a proven track record can get. To qualify, you need a 90% first-time pass rate on check rides over 24 months. Riverside maintains between 93 and 95%. But maybe the most important thing they do is this. They teach students to accept feedback. In a generation where criticism can feel like a personal attack, Robbie is teaching future pilots that constructive critique might literally save your life. He told me,
Making a wrong decision in this industry can result not only in the death of a pilot, but many people. And that's something that we take very seriously. Our record of safety demonstrates that.
that wall of photographs I mentioned at the beginning, pilots from over 95 countries have trained at Riverside. They're flying for Emirates, American, Delta, Southwest, United, you name it. Some are doing bush flying in Alaska. Others are flying air ambulance in Africa. Some are delivering aid in Papua New Guinea. Yuri's favorite success story?
My favorite successes is when I get sent pictures and 3 members of the cockpit, the captain, the first officer, and the training second officer all went through our program. And they just got talking about where they trained. They trained in Oklahoma. They worked with Robbie.
3 pilots in 1 cockpit, all from the same school in Tulsa. That's not luck. That's 25 years of doing things the right way. Here's what I keep coming back to. Riverside Flight Center proves that you don't need the newest aircraft or the flashiest marketing to build excellent pilots. You need standards. You need instructors who genuinely care. You need a system designed around student success, not profit margins. And you need leaders like Yuri and Robbie who remember what it was like to be the student. Nervous, maybe broke, definitely wondering if they could pull this off. As Yuri beautifully said,
Every time I watch someone go solo and land for the first time, I really feel like I've achieved something. I remember the first time they taxied and tried to take me off the runway, and then you watch them actually land and do good and everything else. It's just a very rewarding experience.
25 years, thousands of pilots, 95 countries, a 90% completion rate, and a $25 discovery flight that lets anyone, regardless of background or bank account, experience what it feels like to be at the controls. That's not just a flight school, that's a revolution. If you want to learn more about Riverside Flight Center, check out the links in our show notes or give them a call at 918-298-3164. Be sure to tell them the Future in Flight podcast sent you. Up next, we'll take a look at how ADSB data is being used in ways which could mean flying gets a little bit costlier. What if I told you there's a flight school with a 90% completion rate, where 90% of the students actually finish their training? That's Riverside Flight Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For 25 years, they've been doing things differently, training at Oklahoma's busiest airport, keeping costs about a third of traditional programs, and getting motivated students from zero to CFI in under a year. Right now, Discovery flights are just $25. Learn more at riversideflightcenter.com or call 918-298-3164. That's 918-298-3164. Tell them the Future in Flight podcast sent you. Welcome back. Okay, let's talk about something that's quietly threatening the future of general aviation. And honestly, it's getting a lot of pilots fired up. You know that little black box in modern aircraft that broadcasts your position to everyone around you? ADSB, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast? When it was introduced, the FAA promised pilots it was all about safety. See and be seen. Avoid collisions. Save lives. They said, don't worry, your data is safe with us. Turns out, that wasn't exactly true. I sat down recently with Don Frano at the Affordable Flying Expo. He's a pilot out of Kissimmee, Florida, and founder of Stop ADSB Abuse. What he told me should concern anyone who dreams of flying, anyone who flies now, or anyone who cares about keeping aviation accessible. Here's the deal. A company called Vector has figured out how to turn your safety equipment into a billing system. They're monitoring ADSB data at airports across the country, tracking every landing, matching tail numbers to aircraft owners, and sending a bill in the mail. And airports? They're signing up because, as Don puts it,
for an airport manager, if you're lazy and you don't want to do your job like you're supposed to, it's an easy turnkey system. I just tell you how much I want billed, and the paychecks show up magically in the mail.
In Kissimmee, they're charging $3 for every 1,000 pounds max gross weight per landing. That includes touch and goes. You know, those practice landings student pilots need to master to become safe aviators? Yeah, those cost money now. And here's the kicker. Your first landing is free, but if you have to go around, if you make the safe decision to abort a bad approach, you get charged. Think about that for a second. We're financially penalizing pilots for choosing safety. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but it's just a few bucks, right? Well, remember how I always say follow the downstream effects? Don sees this playing out in real time.
We leave Kissimmee, it's a ghost town. We're flying through here. There's so much traffic in Winter Haven, in Bartow. We're coming into Lakeland, and Lakeland says, don't enter the airspace, we're too full. Everybody's avoiding Kissimmee now, and so all that traffic that used to use practicing is getting displaced to other areas, creating more congestion and compacting the airspace, and I think creating higher risk variables for everybody.
So the thing that was supposed to make flying safer is actually making it more dangerous. And it gets worse. Some pilots are responding by turning off their ADSB transponders entirely. Don literally watched an aircraft fly overhead with no ADSB signature, invisible to everyone's traffic displays. Sound familiar? It should. In Washington, D.C., a helicopter without ADSB collided with an American Airlines jet. In Nevada, a Civil Air Patrol aircraft hit a Swift that had turned off its ADSB. These aren't theoretical scenarios. These are documented accidents where people died.
Traffic.
Orlando, Lakeland, Ormond Beach, Atlanta. Airports across the country are looking at this revenue opportunity. If you want to know if your home airport is next, you have to dig through their website menus like you're solving a puzzle. There's usually no easy way to find out during flight planning. So where does this road lead? Don has a pretty clear answer.
Look at Europe. 30 years ago, Europe had a very thriving GA environment like we do here. 30 years now later, they pay landing fees, takeoff fees, airspace fees, approach fees, talk to a controller fee, and the cost of aviation has gone so out of control that general aviation is all dead in Europe.
Think about that. 30 years. That's one generation. That could be your flying career, starting with promise and ending with aviation becoming so expensive that only the wealthy can participate. Fewer pilots means fewer opportunities, fewer flight schools, fewer aircraft, and fewer jobs. The entire aviation ecosystem that you're hoping to join, it collapses. But here's the good news. Pilots are fighting back. When Orlando held a public hearing on these fees, 400 pilots showed up and killed the proposal. Bills are now moving through the U.S. House, Senate, and Florida legislature to ban ADSB fee collection. Don and his grassroots team at Stop ADSB Abuse are organizing pilots to push back.
And this is our last line in the sand. This is not something you can sit sideline if you care about the outcome down the road. So we need people to jump in and get involved.
Even if you're not a pilot yet, you have power here. Write your representatives. Sign the petition. Join their Facebook group. Because here's what I want you to understand. Aviation has always been about breaking barriers, not building them. We've spent decades making flying more accessible. Better training, better technology, more diverse pathways into the cockpit. This is a threat to all of that. Your ADSB transponder should keep you safe, not send you a bill. Flying should be challenging because it requires skill and dedication, not because someone's nickel and diming you into the ground. So pay attention to this issue, because the decisions being made right now will determine what kind of aviation world you inherit. Let's make sure it's one where the sky is still open to everyone who dreams of it. Coming up next in Cockpit Culture, we take a look at the origins of the commercial airline uniform.
I'd like to welcome you on board at Flight 797 this morning on into Los Angeles.
Welcome into Cockpit Culture, where we explore the nuances of the culture of aviation. Here's a question for you. Have you ever wondered why airline pilots look like they're about to command a battleship instead of a Boeing? I mean, the peaked cap, the gold stripes, the formal jacket, it's all very nautical. And when you think about it, that's kind of weird, right? We're talking about people who fly planes, not boats. But here's the thing. There's actually a fascinating story behind those uniforms. And it all starts with a problem that the early airlines faced in the 1920s. How do you convince people that strapping themselves into a metal tube and flying thousands of feet in the air is a good idea? See, back in the early days of aviation, we're talking the 1920s and early 1930s, pilots didn't have uniforms at all. They basically wore whatever made sense for the job. And if you're flying in an open cockpit, dodging wind, rain, and the occasional spray of engine oil, what makes sense is pretty much World War I leftovers. So picture this: leather bomber jackets with wool trim and big pockets for maps, khaki pants, tall boots, scarves wrapped around your neck, not for fashion, but to keep from freezing at altitude, soft leather helmets, goggles. These pilots kind of look like adventurers, maybe even daredevils, which honestly they kind of were. But here's the problem. If you're an airline trying to sell tickets, daredevil isn't exactly the vibe you want. Passengers don't want to think they're risking their lives. They want to feel safe. They want to trust the person flying the plane. Enter Pan American World Airways, Pan Am, in 1931. This is where everything changes. Remember when I said pilots were commanding boats, not airplanes? Well, it turns out that's not exactly true. You see, back then, Pan Am was operating these incredible flying boats called Clippers, the Sikorsky S-38, the S-40, and later the legendary Boeing 314. These weren't just planes. They were flying luxury hotels that could land on water. They flew routes across the Caribbean, South America, and eventually across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. And here's the genius move. Pan Am's leadership looked at their flying boats and thought, you know what? These things operate more like ships than traditional aircraft. They take off from water and they land on water. So why don't we dress our pilots like ship captains? So they did exactly that. Pan Am introduced formal uniforms modeled after U.S. Navy officers and sea captains. Black double-breasted jackets with braided cuffs, black trousers, white peaked caps with gold insignia, epaulets on the shoulders, sleeve stripes to show rank, just like a naval officer. Suddenly, pilots didn't look like barnstormers or daredevils. They looked like authority figures. They looked trustworthy, professional, experienced. They looked like the kind of people who had been commanding vessels for centuries, guiding passengers safely across dangerous waters. And you know what? It worked. Beautifully. Passengers loved it. When they saw a pilot in that naval-style uniform, they felt reassured. It was visual shorthand for competence and safety. And because Pan Am was basically the gold standard of international aviation at the time, they called themselves the world's most experienced airline. Other airlines around the world started copying the look. By the 1940s and 50s, it had become the global standard. Airlines in Europe, Asia, Australia, Africa, and the Americas, everybody adopted some version of the Pan Am uniform. And here's the wild part. It's barely changed in almost 100 years. Think about that for a second. We've gone from propeller-driven flying boats to supersonic jets. We've got glass cockpits, fly-by-wire systems, computers that can practically fly the plane themselves. But the uniform still looks like something a naval officer would wear in the 1930s. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Okay, Sean, but what do those stripes actually mean? Great question. Let's break it down because this is where naval influence really shows. A captain, the pilot in command, wears 4 stripes on their epaulets and sleeves. Their wing badge usually includes a star inside a laurel wreath. 4 stripes, ultimate authority, just like a Navy captain. The first officer, the co-pilot, wears 3 stripes. Some airlines give their senior first officers a slightly thicker 3rd stripe to show experience. If there's a second officer or additional crew member, they might wear 2 stripes or even 1, depending on the airline and their role. Back in the day when planes needed flight engineers, those crew members had their own stripe configurations too. And trainees, they might not have any stripes at all. at least not until they've earned them. The whole system makes it crystal clear who's in charge, who's second in command, and what everyone else's role is.
Boss, head man, top dog, big cheese, a head honcho.
Captain!
It's practical, sure, but it's also deeply symbolic. It says, we take this seriously. We have a chain of command. We've got this. Now, here's what I love about this story. It's a perfect example of how psychology and branding matter just as much as the technology itself. Pan Am could have kept things casual. They could have let pilots wear whatever they wanted, but they understood something crucial. Flying was new in the 1930s. It was exotic, exciting, but also scary. People needed reassurance. They needed to look at the crew and think, these people know what they're doing. And by borrowing the visual language of the sea, an environment humans had been navigating for thousands of years, Pan Am created an instant sense of trust and tradition. So the next time you're at an airport and see a pilot walking through the terminal in that crisp uniform with the gold stripes and peaked cap, remember, you're looking at nearly a century of aviation history. You're seeing a tradition that started with flying boats in the Caribbean and spread across the entire world. And honestly, I think it's pretty cool that in an industry that changes as fast as aviation, some things, like the uniform, stay timeless. Because whether you're commanding a Clipper flying boat in 1935 or a 787 Dreamliner today, the message is the same. Welcome aboard. You're in good hands. That's going to do it for today's trip around the patch. From 90% completion rates in Tulsa, to fighting ADSB abuse in Kissimmee, to the naval origins of those 4 gold stripes, today's episode reminds us that aviation's future depends on the choices we make right now. As we taxi back, I want to give a huge shout out to Riverside Flight Center. Thank you for being such incredible supporters of this podcast and for everything you do to build the future in flight. 25 years of putting students first, maintaining those sky-high standards, and keeping that 90% completion rate. That's how you change an industry. You're not just training pilots. You're proving that aviation can and should be accessible to anyone with the dream and the determination. Now here's where you come in. If this episode fired you up, inspired you, or taught you something new, hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening. Leave us a review. It genuinely helps other aviation enthusiasts find this show. And if you know someone who's dreaming about a career in aviation, someone who needs to hear that the barriers are meant to be understood, not feared, share this episode with them. Remember, every pilot in every cockpit started exactly where you are. The only difference between them and someone who gave up, they kept showing up. They found the right people, the right instruction, the right community, and they refused to let anyone tell them the sky wasn't for them. So whether you're planning your first discovery flight, grinding through your ratings, or fighting to keep aviation accessible for the next generation, thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about this industry. Thank you for being a part of this community. Until next time, we'll see you out there and up there.